gender equality. The United Nations official theme for the International Women's Day for 2022 is Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow, and recognizing the contribution of women and girls around the world who are leading the charge on climate change, adaptation, mitigation, and response to build a more sustainable future for all. Thank you. Yeah, I hope you can hear me. Yep. You can? Yeah. Okay. So in alignment with this official theme of the United Nations for International Women's Day, IOM's theme is climate change and migration, a matter of gender equality. The climate crisis has had and will continue to have severe and lasting impacts on our environment and economic and social development. These impacts, however, are not felt equally by all members of society. The climate crisis has greater impact on those sections and sectors of the population in all countries that are most reliant on natural resources for their livelihoods and who have the least capacity to respond to natural hazards such as droughts, landslides, floods, and hurricanes. Individuals in these groups are amongst the most vulnerable and therefore experience the deepest impacts of the climate crisis. One such group is women, as women are more dependent on natural resources, which the climate crisis threatens the most. The literature tells us that they are increasingly being recognized as more vulnerable to the impacts of the climate crisis than men. At the same time, women and girls play a critical role in the response to climate crisis and are powerful leaders and change makers for climate change, mitigation, adaptation, and response. This spotlight session is a part of a joint effort by the United Nations Vienna-based organizations and will shed light on the impacts of climate change on migration and displacement, which are intertwined with political, economic, demographic, environmental, and social factors, including gender. This session will examine how the impacts of climate change exacerbate existing gender inequalities in migration and displacement, as women often have less access to decision-making, education, control over resources, and migration options. It's very important for me to stress that, and for all of us to recognize that women and girls have to be equal players in decision-making processes and actions related also to the climate crisis. We recognize that their meaningful participation in these processes is essential for sustainable development and gender equality. More simply put, without gender equality today, a sustainable future and an equal future remains beyond our reach. Without any further ado, please allow me to introduce today's speakers, Mr. Manuel Marquez Pereira, who's the head of the IOM Migration, Environment and Climate Change Division, who will address the important nexus between climate change, migration, and gender. And also Ms. Nargis, the director of the NGO SHIFO, based in Tajikistan, who has worked with IOM and other partners in different activities, including on the project titled Women Staying Behind and Climate Change Adaptation in the Shahrituz region of Tajikistan. There is Russian translation, so please feel free to change to that channel if you so wish. And lastly, as you have heard, this meeting is being recorded. Thank you very much, and without any further ado, the floor over to my colleague Manuel Marquez Pereira. Over to you, Manuel.
Good morning, Amer. Thank you so much. Thank you for giving me the floor and allow me to congratulate the organizers of this spotlight session to discuss the intersections between gender, migration, the environment, and climate change. Ahead of the International Women's Day, today's spotlight session marks an important step for the discussion on paths to gender equality and an equal and sustainable future for everyone. I'm excited to see the number of events and activities organized under the Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow, the theme of this year, as Amer said, highlighting the nexus between climate action, gender equality, and the empowerment of women and girls around the world. What we have already been witnessing is that environmental degradation, extreme climate conditions, and recurrent disasters continue to force movements of millions, mainly within country borders. It is separating families and communities and also destroying livelihoods, infrastructure, and social networks. Environmental migration, like other types of migration, is a gendered process. Vulnerabilities, experiences, needs, and priorities of migrants vary between women and men, as it strongly depends on their roles, on their responsibilities, on access to information, education, or physical security. Gender power relations, cultural norms, and values, together with the gender division of labor, deeply affect and differentiate the adaptive capacity of women and men and their ability or inability to move. Evidence shows that women are more likely than men to die or suffer injury during disasters because they are not warned, they cannot swim, or cannot leave the house alone. Women's roles and responsibilities in the family and in the community also make them more vulnerable to climate change, as their access to basic needs and natural resources such as shelter, food, healthcare, fertile land, water, and fuel is hampered. Women workload increases and their adaptive capacity decreases. Women and girls also have less capacity to move to adapt to climate change impacts or flee a disaster, remaining trapped in dangerous environments with limited livelihoods options. And when it comes to move, and if they can move, women and girls are often more exposed to gender-based violence and human trafficking. While there are still few studies specifically looking at linkages between migration, environment, and gender, it is important to better understand how the gender dimension
We just lost you this very second, so we didn't lose a thing. So
okay, there was a brief apologies.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Please continue.
Thank you. Where I was what we have already been witnessing is that the environmental degradation, extreme climate conditions, and recurrent disasters continue to force movements of millions, mainly within their borders. This is separating families and communities. We are very concerned on how these events, we are very concerned on how these events are at this moment impacting women. It's very interesting to see that we need to continue, as I said before, looking at more research and understanding the direct causes and correlations between the two. If we look in this, we may lead to more accurate understanding of the process, and is also necessary to address the vulnerabilities, experiences, and needs of women and men migrants, so that policies, programs, and projects can respond to gender-specific objectives. We need to continue promoting a rights-based and gender-based approach to environmental migration, which also implies considering gender implications on health rights, including reproductive and health and sexual health, labor rights, social rights, and environmental rights. It's also essential to include gender considerations in the international processes and frameworks related with climate change adaptation, but also disaster risk reduction and environmental migration discussions. This includes in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, more commonly known as the COP, the Sendai Framework on Disaster Risk Reduction that will meet in Bali later in mid-year, and the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration, in order to ensure that policies and interventions are effective and that they do not exacerbate existing inequalities and vulnerabilities or create new ones. Therefore, as outlined in IOM institutional strategy on migration, environment, and climate change that we have put forward for 2021-2030, IOM is adopting a gender-responsive approach as a guiding principle in developing solutions for people to move, solutions for people already on the move, and solutions for people to be able to stay. We need to advance the mainstreaming of gender-responsive climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction, as well as promote women leadership in disaster prevention, preparedness, recovery, and resilience across the UN system. This also requires improved evidence and data to facilitate gender-responsive policymaking and creating opportunities to promote and recognize women's knowledge, empowerment, and leadership. To achieve long-lasting gender equality, however, we need to challenge gender roles and stereotypes associated with both women and men. We have to learn to rethink the value of roles and contributions and recognize that women, including migrant women, are also powerful agents of change and leaders in their communities and families, and that at the national and international level, providing resources for their families, facilitating migration, and adapting during displacement is significantly important. In our work, we witness women as powerful leaders of change in their families and communities and in climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. In this regard, I would like to call to attention and acknowledge the contribution, determination, and resilience of those women affected by adverse effects of climate change. I think of the women in Shairtuz district of Tajikistan who, in the absence of their spouses, manage their household resources and risks from environmental hazards by developing household-level climate change adaptation plans. My colleagues from Tajikistan will further elaborate on this project later, but also the groups of women in Southern Adel in Somalia, organizing community cleanups and activity raising awarenesses on waste reduction, or Sanas and Lajil governorates in Yemen, where women are taking on leadership roles as peacemakers in managing water resources. These are just a few examples to showcase the vigorous efforts of women driving positive change in their communities, also supported by IOM. Last but not least, let me emphasize in particular that gender equality is not only a woman's issue, it's an everyone's issue. We cannot solve gender inequalities without getting everyone to understand that gender roles shape the ways in which both women and men, people of all genders, think, live their lives, and act towards each other. Rooting for migration women and women staying behind does not weaken the support and empathy towards migrant men, while in most cases addressing the vulnerabilities based on gender involves promoting women's equality. It's important to adequately consider also men's vulnerabilities and integrate the gender dimension in vulnerability assessments, reduction, and management. All genders have particular economic and social disadvantages that make them vulnerable to climate change, although their vulnerabilities are not always the same as they often interact with their physical environment in different ways. If we ensure that the most marginalized people can reach safety, then everyone will. In this regard, it is critical to address existing gender inequalities and ensure the rights of people of all genders, including women and girls who experience intersecting forms of discrimination based on race, ethnicity, religion, social status, ability, and others. The negative impacts of climate change exacerbate the challenges faced by marginalized groups, including migrant women, children, persons with disabilities, migrants with irregular status, LGBTIQ persons and elderly people, and who are already exposed to heightened risk of violence, poverty, and societally exclusion. If we ensure that these vulnerable groups are safe, everyone will be too, because they are the ones at the highest risk from a changing climate. It is a non-zero-sum game. Safety of migrant women and women staying behind would not mean the absence of other people's safety. This is what intersectional justice is about, and it's about leaving no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manuel, for this excellent presentation, and indeed reminding us in the important activities and events that IOM is doing to ensure that women are empowered and part of and contributors, if not even accelerators, to positive change and development. So thank you very much for that. And that gender equality is indeed everyone's issue. So addressing women's needs and gender equality are indeed interlinked, and that it is indeed not just an issue for women, but it's also an issue that men, of course, need to look into as well. Now, again, we mentioned, and as per the agenda, that we would have a contribution to one of the many projects that also Manuel referred to, a contribution from Tajikistan, where IOM is supporting an SHIFO, a national non-governmental organization, in exactly that, in empowering women who are left behind as the men maybe migrate and send back remittances. And again, as we have heard, women are left behind and how they are empowered to again become contributors and positive agents of change in addressing also issues related to climate change. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce Ms. Narges, the director of SHIFO, who will be presenting in Russian, I believe, but we do have translations. So please go to the interpretation logo on the bottom and switch the language of your preference. So Ms. Narges, do we have you? I do not see you, but I know you have a presentation as well.
Yes, I'm here. Hello, dear colleagues, dear friends. Thank you very much for this possibility to speak to you at this session on climate change and gender issues. And I would like to congratulate all of you and your families on the International Women's Day and wish you health and happiness. My name is Nargiza. I am the director of SHIFO NGO in the south of Tajikistan. We are a partner with IOM, and we are implementing a project and we are conducting activities related to the project Tajikistan Understanding the Nexus of Migration, Gender, Climate Change and Agriculture. So I would like to explain the importance of this project. We deal with women in rural areas, and they need to adapt their strategies in facing the climate change and water shortages in Shahritur's region of Tajikistan. So please show the next slide, if it's possible. Next slide. So we are an NGO, a local NGO. We were founded in 1999. The goal was to improve the social economic situation of women, children, refugees and labor migrants in rural areas by providing them education, information and raising awareness to improve the situation with women's rights. And thanks to our partnership with Tajikistan's government and with international organizations, SHIFO is working to improve women's social economic situation, to reduce poverty, to inform them. And we are dealing, first of all, with families where women are breadwinners. In Shahritur's region, thanks to our organization, a lot has been done, and we were elected a partner of IOM to conduct project-level activities in Tajikistan. Well, the project is called Understanding the Nexus of Migration, Gender, Climate Change and Agriculture. And it's a very important project to improve women's capacity in Shahriku's region in Tajikistan, those regions that suffer a lot from water shortages. Next slide, please. The purpose of our project is the following. We want to deal with climate change because it impacts Tajikistan's rural population, first of all, and especially those who work in the agriculture sector. Particularly, Shahriku's region is suffering a lot from water shortages. It's the hottest region in Tajikistan. And so climate change impacts not only households. Our region is an agricultural one. A lot of people are employed in agriculture, and of course, water shortages are a very important problem there. We are also facing a lot of migration. Men go abroad and women are left at home, so they need to manage the whole household. Those women face a lot of obstacles in rural communities because of social norms and customs. A woman becomes a head of her own household. She becomes a manager of the whole family. So she replaces a man. Previously, men were those who managed agriculture, but now women are breadwinners. They work at home and they work outside of home. Sometimes men don't want to come back from Russia, so women are left alone. From 10 to 15% of all the women we are working with live in extreme poverty. In our region, there are a lot of divorces because of this dire economic situation. But even if they are not divorced, sometimes men stay in Russia for a very long time. Some studies were conducted, and we try to understand the interaction between migration, climate change, and agriculture. And those studies were quite
понять, какие мероприятия могут помочь.
And for other organizations as well, because it was very important to understand how we can help women in rural areas, how they can adapt to climate change, and how they can improve their lives. Next slide, please. So we started with some preliminary studies, and we found out that, well, almost 50% of women try to spare some money, but they are using those money to pay for healthcare services, for different services, but they don't invest their savings in order to fight water shortages, for example. So we try to improve financial literacy in rural areas so that they can create some strategy how to deal with climate change. And every year there is less and less water in those rural areas because of climate change. And to solve this problem, our SHIFO NGO organized 4 workshops on financial literacy to support women to help them to adapt to the extreme climate conditions. We explained how to manage households, how to manage remittances, how to save money, and to deal with some unforeseen expenses. Because of, unfortunately, the sound is extremely bad from Nargise. So we invited participants from 8 villages, and in total 480 women attended those workshops. So we tried to teach them best adaptation strategy and also how to spare water resources. It's also very important. So in the framework of this project, after those workshops, half of those women, 240 women exactly, will also be beneficiaries of consultant services, and they will receive SMS messages from our experts. It is very important so that they learn how to manage their expenses as accountants, so they will note down their expenses, their revenues, so that they know how to invest them better, how to create savings plan, and how to be prepared to climate change on the level of their households. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Goals and achievements. The main goal has been to promote that the women can see what changes in the behavior would help them adapt. And we hoped that the members of our workshops would start saving money and invest that money into the solutions that mitigate climate change in their households. So we would like for the participants to understand their costs, exercise their savings, and for them to understand as well as the opportunities and the favorable conditions that could improve their adaptation strategies for their households. The first few steps that I already referred to included trainings on financial literacy. These trainings started in January 2022, although the services, the extension services haven't even started yet, but still we can tell you now that after the trainings, some of the participants received motivation to somehow calculate their budgets, to forecast their savings and their costs. Some of the women have even opened bank accounts, and that means that they started having deposits up to 200,000 somani, and others are simply using some boxes in their houses or piggy banks to control their savings. So they've created these piggy banks and they started to do savings pretty much. In the next few months, we will be training them in climate change adaptation, and we will be providing services on the dissemination of knowledge so that we would be able to link these two strategies in one. And we are hopeful that the participants will be able to understand how remittances and household savings can give them opportunities to start implementing adaptation strategies in their households and in their communities. And their responses, their actions are very important for our project, for our policy, and for our practice as a SHIFO. We are trying to understand the nexus between migration, gender, climate change, and agriculture to guide future policy and programming in the Republic of Tajikistan, because this financial literacy, the financial literacy of the households, was included in the policy and the program of the Republic of Tajikistan that our project is currently pursuing. This is actually a whole program. It is the policy of the country, the Republic of Tajikistan, and to satisfy the needs of our women to create sustainability in our households and in our communities in responding to climate change, we are pursuing this agenda. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, I would be happy to take them.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nargis, for sharing with us this incredible experience and for the amazing numbers that we have seen today in terms of women participants to your trainings. We also saw some men sitting in the background of those photographs. So it was good to see that men are also supporting the women in their as they get, let's say, more independence and make more contributions to the society. That means that men are also recognizing the important role of women in that community, which is great to see. Also, definitely very good to see some of the great achievements that you have achieved. Some of the stories that we heard, like women actually making enough savings to be able to open bank accounts. Of course, this is one step to then empowering future generations as well in the future. So that's really great to hear. Congratulations again to everyone involved in the project, and to all the brave men and women who have contributed to ensuring that women remain also as an important player and actor in these activities and in these initiatives towards change. I guess we have the session for question and answers. So maybe I open the floor, and if there are any questions, please do use the hand function or feel free to write in the chat any questions you may have. And the floor is open for any questions. So I have a question from a hand raised from Anna. So Anna, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you for the presentation. I was wondering if the project faced some challenge during the process. If you can mention what were the challenging, if there are some. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Nargis, would you? Yes, over to you, please.
Yes, thank you. I did understand the question. Yes, we did have some challenges in pretty much everything. When we invited women, men would always ask this question: oh, what is going to be the benefit from this workshop? What do you want from our wives? And we had to actually invite them as families with their husbands to this information campaign. So prior to having the workshops, we had a real awareness campaign, and we had to explain what we wanted to achieve, what were our objectives, what were our goals. After that, men gave their agreement, and they even said, let our wives participate in your trainings 100 times if necessary, because savings is something that our women are really bad at. All they do is spend money, and it was a pleasure that they themselves gave their agreement. Many of the wives called to Russia to their husbands over there about whether they could participate in the workshop. So we had difficulties. There is no way without that.
Thank you very much for that. I hope, I'm sure that's only one of the challenges. I'm sure there is many others as well. So thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Okay, so I don't see any hands, so I'm sorry for that. I'm just going between the screens to see if there are any questions also in the chat. And I don't see any, and maybe just as others maybe try to gather their thoughts, maybe some questions. I actually had a question for for Manuel on sharing just again a couple of other generic examples of projects that may be implemented in other regions, also along the lines of supporting women. You mentioned a few. Would it be possible to maybe share some examples of those projects as well, or just what we're doing, what IOM is doing? And
I think, thank you, Amr. I think that our colleague from the Sheffield has already pointed. It's the initial start. A lot of the challenges that we have are how to say this, are on challenging the gender roles and the position of women in society. You know, men's acceptance of this participation, the questions around why is this necessary and only women are the majority of the challenges that we face. I think that if I could highlight something, not on the case of savings, but we are trying to work very much on adaptation, right? And so trying to understand how can we contribute to empower women on decision makings on adaptation that involves structural things like land property, housing, completely mobility or not, people trapped in immobility to move to another location or commute to a location involve also access and freedom of movement, which many women in many contexts do not have. I don't want to particularize countries, but one of the things that we are seeing is land property will start becoming a major issue for women if they are not culturally accepted as the holders of land. And that will be one very significant challenge in areas that are suffering coastal erosion, river erosion, salinization, in areas of drought. And so I think that will be one of the big challenges in the future in many questions related with climate change. But the other ones depends a lot on the region and how women are seen or valued as a contribution, right? In certain countries in Asia, women hold decision-making power over crops and the agriculture, not the men, which means that adaptation of livelihoods and change of the crop outputs is much easier. And so there is a series of processes that we need to continue working to gender equality if we want really to mitigate the impact of climate change. And that would be a very summarized point on this, Amber.
Thank you very much, Manuel, for that, and indeed some excellent points for reflection, and sometimes things that we may take for granted in some regions in the world are not obviously taken for granted in others. So yeah, no, thank you very much. I have Ivana Manelli with her hand up, so with a question. So over to you, Ivana.
Yes, thank you very much for giving me the floor. I have two quick questions for Nargiz, whom I would really like to thank for giving us an outlook on this amazing project that's taking place in Tajikistan. So Nargiza, sorry, it sounds as though environmental migration in the specific situation that you are tackling is exacerbating existing inequalities in the region. And so first of all, I was wondering, how do you identify women to take part in the project? And if this project is only targeting women specifically affected by climate change, do you believe that it will have an even wider impact or longer term impact on the wider community of women that are affected by migration? Thank you.
Thank you for the very interesting question. So the first question is about the environment. How do we select women for participation? First of all, before we start our activities, we had a baseline study. It was conducted by the Mir Zerkala organization, and they identified categories of women that could participate in our work. They had lists of participants. After the lists were developed, we visited the villages, we spoke to the women, we got their agreement to participate, we got the agreement of their husbands or their mother-in-laws. agreement for them to participate. After that, we drafted lists. After the lists were drafted, our trainers that had been through the TOT on financial literacy, started their activities. Second question, long-term nature and engaging a greater number of people. We also gave this some thought. Currently, the number of women is limited, but besides this, we also provide counseling. And in the villages that are interested, I mean, women that are interested, for instance, neighbors, friends, they also take this information from these women. And when they turn to us, we give them consultations about how to have a deposit in the bank, how they can take advantage of that. So we provide our counseling, and the counseling is not only for the immediate beneficiaries, we also offer the same services for other women.
Thank you very much for those replies and for the question, Ivana, and I hope those replies provided by Nargis is what you're looking for. We also have, for me, this transition problem with translation slightly, but yeah, I'm sure we can fix that. Are there any other questions? Any other? I see Eleonora has her hand up. So Eleonora, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Amer, and thanks indeed for both the presenters for a very interesting presentation. I was just wondering how the needs of the women, which are identified throughout the project, how can this be translated into policies which are tackling climate change adaptation? And another quick related question, also how, while mainstreaming gender into policies, how to make sure that the role of women and girls is recognized as agents of change and in climate adaptation. I hope I was clear, and I would really appreciate an answer. Thank you very much.
Okay, I don't know, maybe the first half of the question, maybe.
Thank you for your question. As for women's needs, during our workshops, we have special sessions. I mean, our workshops on financial literacy. So during those special sessions, we try to evaluate women's needs. So they note down their needs, and we try to find links between those needs and climate change, droughts. There is no sound from Nargise. How those needs are related to water shortages. And what do women need? Because, well, they always need money. And those women that we are working with now, well, quite often they are women from Afghanistan and they never went to school. So quite often they have no formal education. So our trainers, step by step, explain to them in their mother tongues everything. So it was quite difficult. It was quite difficult to deal with those women. So we tried to start with the basics. So we believe that it is very important to evaluate their needs during those workshops. And how do we implement changes? Well, we can't influence policy, but by providing educational trainings, by explaining how to be financially literate, well, we are preparing those women to active life so that they know how to manage their budget and the budget of her household. Because, you know, a state has a huge budget, a region has a smaller budget, but everything starts with small amounts, with the household's budget. So if we can manage the budget of our own household, we will be able to manage, well, the bigger budgets. So we can't influence directly our state policy, but everyone should start with their family to make the calculations, to count money. Everything is related so that everyone understands the link between money and climate change and water shortages, etc.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if Manuel would like to come in on the second half on how we ensure that gender considerations are indeed part and parcel of programming and response, rather, as well, in climate change, specifically climate change programming within the realm of migration. I think Manuel mentioned it quite eloquently in his opening remarks and in his speech on the importance of that, but maybe he can stress a little bit more on what it is that IOM does together with its partners to ensure that indeed women are not forgotten, and not only not forgotten, but are actually considered you know, as drivers, accelerators, not just contributors to climate change adaptation within the context of migration as well. So over to you, Manuel.
Thank you, Amr. Well, there are different approaches. Let me start by one, which is probably the easiest one in terms of data collection, right? One of the important things that we are trying to look at is understanding data so that we can make analysis and we can inform not only programming, but also policy at the macro level when these different analyses are combined. The displacement tracking matrix of IOM has for several years now been very effective on pinpointing the differentiated needs of the different segments of the population. We have copied part of that learning process into many of the projects that we do, and we try to help the partners and the organizations that work with us to have that lens of individual needs, of voices, right? And so what I think is one of the best strategies of these is the direct work with the communities and focus group discussions and spaces where women are free from man interference, where women have the space to discuss and be presented, but also on program design, because if we do not have these community level conversations before we start designing the process, we will artificially be including bias on the entire structure of the process. So I continue to insist with our colleagues worldwide on the part that I can contribute, that is very important to have a differentiated understanding of the needs of the different populations, build that on program design, and then do the follow-up and the capacity to engage with the community. I can give an example where this is done in South America, where we are working with indigenous women on understanding the impacts of climate change. And of course, in the indigenous community, in some forms of matriarchal societies, there are other types of challenges that are on patriarchal societies. And so balancing these, allowing voices of elderly, indigenous communities, women, girls, youth, which is a very critical element on the discussions about climate justice, is an effort that we have to do from day one on preparing to design a process. And as our colleague from Shiplu said, we need to start somewhere. And if we influence one family, we are working pro to the entire system. I think it's that build up that will promote more equality. Over.
No, thank you very much for that. Once again, Emmanuel, and indeed, I mean, I guess couldn't agree more really on by not including women when we are being biased and we only address part of the response, and definitely not the entire part of the response, because right now we are looking at in the specific project that are women that are left behind. But of course, within the migration context, women are not always left behind. In fact, we do have an increasing number, particularly in this region, of women being on the move and women being drivers, of course, of development, and but also women migrants themselves with leaving maybe their spouses or their families or their children behind. So different aspects also need to be taken into consideration when we look at women not just as left behind, but actually women also on the move, and how their actions as well contribute to addressing broader climate change issues as well. So Peter, you have your hand up. We have maybe 5 more minutes, and then we just wrap up. So maybe we'll take this last question from Peter, and then we close. Peter, over to you.
Okay, thank you. It's clear that women have been engaged throughout this, but and empowered. But I wanted to ask, to what extent did women have license to engage in the project of their own volition, and were they receptive and aware of the issues that climate change caused? So a two-pronged question.
No, indeed. Thank you very much for that, Peter. And indeed, an important one about women's awareness as well on how they can contribute to climate change in different ways as well. So responding to climate change crisis, but also awareness of climatic changes around them as well. So maybe over to Ms. Nargis to respond to that, as of course she's been closest to these women and working with them. So Ms. Nargis, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Quite an interesting question, in fact, because when we are working in the rural areas, well, I have been working in those areas since 1999, and it was quite difficult in this project because we need always go step by step. And then when we had first results, women became aware, they became interested, they asked themselves questions. What do we need to know? What do we want to know? So 10 years ago, we invited them, and now they come themselves. They start asking questions. What are your trainings about? How we can participate? So after a lot of awareness raising, it is easier now. And it is easier now to explain those issues during workshops. I would like to stress one more time, those are women who are, for example, from Afghanistan, who have no formal education, who sometimes don't have basic education. So 50% of our participants are women like that. And well, the second half, the second 50%, well, those are women that have already attended some workshops and trainings. So it's easier with them. And well, after our workshops, they become more interested. We stay in contact. It's work in progress. So yes, well, they come and they want to come. They are interested. We see their interest. And I believe that this project will continue to be an important one because, well, those people need it. And the results we have, well, those are just preliminary results, the very first results on the climate change, on the gender issues. We didn't have any similar projects previously. So we are at the beginning, and I believe it will be a huge success.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nargis, for that. And I couldn't agree more that, yes, it's an excellent start. The conversation needs to start somewhere, and clearly you have led that conversation in that part of Tajikistan. So congratulations to you and your team. We have maybe a couple of minutes to wrap up. So I just wanted to thank you all for your participation today, and a special thanks to our colleagues who were joining us from IOM headquarters, to Manuel Pereira, and of course to Ms. Nargis for having presented this project today and having shared some of the experiences from the ground and the important responses of women in addressing climate change issues as well. I also take this opportunity to maybe share with you just a couple of upcoming initiatives as well that IOM is doing also with UN Women, also related to International Women's Day, and more broadly, of course, the empowerment of women as well. We have a side event at the upcoming CSW, Conference on the Status of Women, which is taking place on the 21st of March. And it's about promoting and protecting the rights of migrant women in the context of climate change, environmental degradation, and disasters. So again, very much in line with the global topic. And we also have a side event, again, IOM and UN Women, but in this case, it's the Issue-Based Coalition, which is a coalition of UN agencies that look at migration, refugee, and resilience issues. And then the other one, which is the Issue-Based Coalition on Gender, again, another coalition and constellation of UN agencies that look at gender issues and women empowerment, particularly, but not only. And those two issue-based coalitions are getting together at the Regional Forum for Sustainable Development in early April, and again, doing another event, side event, to promoting and recognizing the important contributions of women in development as well. So those are two important events that are taking place, which we will again share with anyone who's interested in receiving that information. And talking of receiving information, there was also a request by one of the UN colleagues in the chat earlier, and I apologize I did not address that. We will share a copy of the project with you if you're interested. We'll make sure to share it with you. It's not on the IOM project website, on the website yet, but we will put it up there. But in the meantime, we will share a brochure, a copy of the project with you. And as I close, I just take again this opportunity to let you know that the next Spotlight session will take place tomorrow. And it will be hosted by the International Atomic Energy Agency, an extremely important event and a very exciting event. And when we read about it, we were thrilled, and we definitely look forward to it. And it's called Climate Change and Gender Equality, IAEA's role in Atoms for Climate. So hashtag Atoms for Climate. And two more events will take place on Thursday and Friday. My colleagues will put the registration link in the chat right now. So once again, thank you very, very much to everyone, and wishing you all a great rest of the day. And as we prepare for International Women's Day, please do follow us also on our website and our Twitter page, and the link shared by my colleague as well in the chat for more events. Thank you very much for the translators, for the organizers, and for everyone, and wishing everyone a great day. Thank you very much, Manuel, again. Thank you very much, Ms. Nargis, again, and looking forward to being in touch. Thank you
very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.